So upon there being good people in this world, upon there being bad people in this world, I do start to think to the paranormal, whereas phenomena, for instance. Why do shadow people exist in this world? You gotta really think about this. They do exist. They do exist. And a lot of times, too, especially, the shadow people in paranormal investigations, they will attack. They actually are hostile. They are not careworthy. So, thinking about demonic possession, for instance, how do you really know that? How do you really know that a demonic spirit really cares about you? But at the time when, say that you do die, how do you know that spirit isn't just going to let you fall and afterwards move on to somebody else as the next victim? You don't know that. So, a lot of times people who tend to think, oh, you're wrong, you're wrong. So we do get atheists and liberals involved where they think that, oh, they're just good people, they just leave them alone. No, that is not how it works in this world. And I don't even know how they get by without noticing that symbolism is everywhere in this world, such as an invention, whereas what we use today, why it's even there, what it represents. For instance, the light bulb, it represents light, it represents sight. Whereas without it, you'd be trapped in the darkness. But there are people today who see things differently as to where they think the light is the darkness, and they do think that the darkness is the light. Which is kind of crazy because those are people who are really indulged in the mirror way too much. Which is why people do tell too, especially in folklore. See, when I do coin the Antichrist, I do think that when you coin the Antichrist, see, this is how I see it. When you coin the Antichrist, then you're able to come back into the Bible more and read off passages like you really do understand what this book is talking about. So, when you tend to look at folklore stories, you kind of start to think maybe these are actually sensible. They actually have been determined to be true on purpose, because chances are they do exist. So, when you look at, for instance, the story of the Bloody Mary, now it is a scary story because the Bloody Mary is always seen to be existing in the mirror. So, whereas you're not supposed to look at the mirror for too long, otherwise the Bloody Mary appears when you chant her name out or something. But granted, there are people who do stare at the mirror way too long, and that can actually cause an effect in their minds, their heads, their brains, maybe even their what you call it, those veins or whatever you call them, neurals something, but neural sensibility, I forget what they call it, but because I'm not really into autonomy really. I only think that to find your soulmate in this world is to only know so much compared to knowing the heart, the body, outer. See, when you come to think that maybe when you finally think you found true love, you think that maybe it's the body, it's also the heart. But then you start to realize that maybe when you dive into it a little more, then you start to see spirit. But people in this day and age, as I see relationships going on, they just go right into it. They just think it's spiritual. That's all they think. And whereas materialism is just ineffective. So when I start to think about it, chivalry, is it really dead today? And granted, everything is more machine operated now. It's not being operated anymore by human a lot now these days, such as a door. It's electronic now. It's not always going to be anymore to where you get to open the door for the lady and they get to freely walk in. Over time, the lady is going to feel more overpowered by will, to whereas they're going to think that they're more seen as men than they are seen as women. So when you see the guy, they feel rejected and they go through some tough, tough times. So the guy tends to think that they're opposite more than what they think that they are. Because they doubt themselves. Everybody doubts themselves. It's they think it's human. In a way, it is a human flaw. I don't doubt that. So in spirit, though, Satan is enemy, but death in human is enemy. So by faith, such as from Christ, his resurrection, assured of their own as being in the Bible as him walking the earth again. I really do think a lot about that, because how is it possible for somebody to come back up again just like that? So when all men become mortal, that's the way we are. We're mortals. We're not gods. We can be like gods, but we're not gods. Because superpowers just don't exist in this world. I'm not seeing it. I only see machinery, such as a gun. I see Xboxes. I see PlayStations. And just what we do in the virtual reality is just what we do, because we can't really have that in real life. So when it's seen in real life, it's being seen more as portrayal to what we are doing amongst ourselves as that kind of person, to what we like to fathom with our own interests. But outside of the interests box, a lot of people, especially I've seen all over the news, they aren't real. These are a lot of people too who are not being parented correctly, seen as to why they're uneducated, why they would rather go out there and just kill somebody, whereas instead of just wanting to love somebody and basically prove their existence to somebody, show that they really are meaningful, they do care. So when you come across somebody that does care, when you've been hurt so many times, they just don't see that anymore. So what they do is that they take advantage of you because they see you as a victim to their own beliefs, their own thoughts, their own worries. So it's like you're talking to a wall, a mirror. They don't care about you. All they think about is reflecting themselves off of you, being self-destructive. So in a way, I really don't think there is a way to cure a narcissist, because a lot of narcissists are sexually stimulated from this, such as to how people think that masturbation is healthy for you. Well, how can masturbation be healthy for you if, for in fact, it fuels the narcissist? You gotta think about that here, folks. So Christ himself, as being the first fruits of knowledge, pretty much, as his coming, his redeemed people will be raised before others. At the last, the wicked will rise also. Then will be the end of this present state of things. Would be triumphed in the solemn and important season. We must now submit to his rule, accept his salvation, and live to his glory. Then shall we rejoice in the completion of his undertaking, that God may receive the whole glory of our salvation. And see here, the doctrine of resurrection, if the dead rise not at all, those who own a God and a providence, and observe how unequal things are in the present life, how frequently the best men fear worse, cannot doubt as an inner state, where everything will sit to rights, being that persistent. But the thing is, though, if we're not fighting Satan in human society, then what are we fighting? Are we fighting death, aka the Grim Reaper? What we see in fiction as the Grim Reaper, but in actuality, how we see it today is basically stricken life from its dues. Know that in spirit, Jesus describes Satan as the holy enemy, but when you coin the Antichrist in human, death is the enemy. Verse 26, the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. This rendering might imply that other enemies should still exist, though. Death should be the last who would be destroyed. The original is more forcible and implies the last enemies doomed to annihilate death, or as in Tyndale's version, lastly death, the enemy shall be destroyed, or as in the Brown version, and at the last death, the enemy shall be destroyed. The present is being amuled. Hold on here. Regarded as already begun and continuing by any inevitable law, death and Hades and the devil, who hath the power of death, are all doomed to abolishing. Now, this is a lot of dark stuff here, but still, when you see death, it's a depiction of somebody carrying a scythe. Looks like a skeleton. You know, that usual portrayal of being mighty strong, nothing fears me. So the answer to fear, why children are opposed to closet monsters, I believe that is because people are more self-destructive to where they don't see the sense at all anymore in this day and age. So when you come to think of the media, where you start to believe that news topics, news trends are out there, you start to think that they're actually real, true, they do hold value, but in actuality, they are nothing but lies, because nobody really knows the full-on truth until more stories come out. People do discuss, people do debate, but the sentient entity that has existed in many societies since the beginning of recorded history in English, death is often given the name the Grim Reaper from the 15th century onwards. I do want to encourage this though to people though, but I do recommend that you do look up on personifications, because what we are seeing today as to what the terrorism we're seeing today in this world is actually in fact related to personifications, being that why people are always so stricken from being good people is because that's what personifications are. They're seen more as abstract, more like sensibility of being this instead of that. So when you look at an introvert and an extrovert, I believe there is a way that you can actually be both introvert and extrovert. So, such as borderline. That's kind of the kind of person that I am. I do tend to retreat a lot into my mind, but at the same time, I do tend to draw it out more into people, whereas I like to speak more clearly about myself. So I tend to think of myself more as a person conspiring light and darkness through a twilight sense of humor. I do tend to have a dark sense of humor at times, but I do tend to be more on the comedy point side, to where I'd like to make people seem more worth happy. I want to see people laugh. I want to make people happy. Show them references to things on YouTube even that just make them happy. And over time, I do wish to apply that to one day finding myself a girlfriend, but I just never had a girlfriend before in my life, and now of this day, I just don't see myself getting there. So I do have issues going on in my life right now, to whereas I do start to doubt myself on that, but those are my problems still. And over the times though, when I do look at the passages in the Bible, how a lot of people just, as of late in our community, such as Westboro or anything else out there, they tend to go out of their leagues to influence hate upon you, whereas in a sense that darkness is death that we're seeing today. So you just cannot be a Christian and just assume that you are trying to care and love people, but you're placing yourself out there to go and harass people with the poster signs and the symbolic portrayals and just telling people that you're just going to go to hell. But because ultimately that person is not your life. It's not your life at all. But even though you're still living with that person, there are laws that do tell differently about that. But still, there are a lot of fake Christians in this world. As the more days go by, you will find that people are going to continue to worship Satan, unaware of spirit versus human characteristics and flaws. Whereas telling time, true darkness is indeed upon us, whether it's pornographic, violent, self-hatred, sexual stimulation. Fact is, there's a working force out there that's not comparable to Satan. It's an evil that is flushing out from people and control